The Scythian felt makers, close your eyes and breathe deeply. Let your body sink into comfort as we journey back through time to the vast steppes of ancient Scythia, where the wind whispers secrets across endless grasslands, and skilled hands work magic with wool and water. Chapter 1. The Morning Mist. In the time before memory, when the world was younger and the sky seemed closer to the earth, there lived a people who moved like shadows across the great steppes. The Scythians. They were called by those who knew their name, though they called themselves simply the people of the veldt. The morning mist clung to the grasslands like a soft gray blanket, and through this gentle veil rode Anya, her horse's hooves making the softest whisper against the dew-dampened earth. She was young, perhaps 20 summers, with hands already skilled in the ancient craft that had been passed down through generations of her people. Today, like every day, she would make felt. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Whisper, picked her way carefully through the morning landscape. The wool came from their sheep, hardy creatures that thrived in the harsh steppes, their fleeces growing thick and strong against the wind. As Anya rode, she could see the smoke rising from the felt-making camp in the distance, thin gray ribbons ascending into the pale sky. The sight filled her with a deep, quiet contentment. This was her world, her people, her craft. Here, in this moment, all was as it should be. The morning air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of wild grass and distant flowers. Anya breathed deeply, feeling the peace of the steppes fill her lungs, when the only sounds were the gentle breathing of her horse and the soft rustle of grass in the breeze. The old woman moved with the grace of long practice, her weathered hands sure and steady as they worked the wool. At 80 summers, Vara was the master felt maker of their clan, keeper of the old ways and the deep secrets of the craft. Anya dismounted and led Whisper to the grazing area, where other horses stood quietly, their reins loose, content to crop the sweet grass. She untied her bundles of wool and carried them to where her grandmother waited, the soft fibers seeming to glow in the morning light. Vara looked up and smiled, her face creased with lines that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun and wind. "Good morning, little felt maker. The wool looks fine today. The sheep have been generous." Anya nodded, kneeling beside the bundles to examine the fleece. She ran her fingers through it, feeling its softness, its potential. Chapter 2. The Ancient Ways. The felt-making camp was a place of quiet industry. Several families worked here, each at their own station, but all part of the greater rhythm of creation. The pools were shallow basins lined with smooth stones, filled with water that had been heated by the sun and warmed further by stones heated in the fire. "In the beginning," she said, "our people discovered the secret by accident. A shepherd had placed wool in his boot to cushion his foot during a long journey. Anya had heard this story many times, but she never tired of it. She listened as she began to prepare her wool, combing it gently with wooden combs to align the fibers. The repetitive motion was soothing, almost meditative. From this accident, Vara continued, came our greatest craft. Felt is not woven like cloth. It is born from transformation, from the marriage of wool, heat, moisture, and pressure. It is magic made manifest. The old woman demonstrated as she spoke, taking a handful of prepared wool and laying it carefully on a reed mat. Her movements were fluid, practiced, like a dance she had performed 10,000 times. She arranged the fibers in layers, each layer perpendicular to the last, building up a structure that would become strong and dense. Anya followed her grandmother's example, laying out her own wool with the same careful attention. The fibers seemed to glow in the soft morning light, and she could almost feel their eagerness to transform, to become something greater than their individual strands. Around them, the other felt makers worked in comfortable silence. There was old Dmitri, whose felt was so fine it was said to be waterproof in all but the heaviest rains. There was young Sasha, just learning the craft, her movements still uncertain but filled with enthusiasm. There was Mira, who sang softly as she worked ancient songs that seemed to help the wool remember its purpose. The sounds of the camp were gentle and rhythmic, the soft splash of water, the whisper of wool being laid out, the quiet conversations between teachers and students. It was a symphony of creation, as old as the steppes themselves. Chapter 3. The Water's Gift. When the wool was laid out to Vara satisfaction, a rectangle of white softness about the size of a horse blanket, the next phase began. This was where the true magic happened, where separate fibers would become one unified whole. Vara dipped a wooden bowl into the warm pool and poured the water slowly over the arranged wool. The water was not just heated by the sun. It had been blessed by the wise women of the tribe, infused with herbs that would help the transformation. As the water soaked into the wool, Anya could see the fibers beginning to relax, to open themselves to change. The water must be just the right temperature, Vara instructed, her voice soft and hypnotic. Too hot, and the wool becomes brittle. Too cold, and it will not bind. Like all things in life, it is about balance, about finding the perfect harmony. Anya watched as her grandmother began to work the wet wool, pressing gently at first, then with increasing pressure. The motion was rhythmic, almost like kneading bread, but gentler, more respectful of the material being transformed. Feel how the wool responds, Vara said, guiding Anya's hands to join hers on the wet fibers. It wants to become felt. Our job is simply to encourage it, to provide the conditions for its transformation. Under their combined pressure, Anya could feel something changing in the wool. The individual fibers were beginning to lock together, their microscopic scales catching and holding. What had been loose and separate was becoming unified, coherent, strong. The process required patience. They worked the wool slowly, methodically, adding water when it became dry, adjusting the pressure as needed. Sometimes they would roll the wool in the reed mat, pressing and rolling, like the rhythm of waves on a distant shore. As they worked, Vara told stories of the great felt makers of the past, women and men whose skill was legendary, whose felt was said to be so fine that it could turn arrows, so beautiful that kings would trade gold for it. These stories were part of the teaching, part of the passing down of not just technique, but inspiration. Chapter 4. The Songs of Making. As the morning progressed and the sun climbed higher in the sky, the felt makers began to sing. It started with Mira, as it usually did, her voice rising in an ancient melody that seemed to come from the earth itself. One by one, the others joined in, their voices blending in harmonies as old as the craft itself. The songs were working songs, their rhythm matching the motions of felt making. They helped coordinate the work, helped maintain the proper pace and pressure. But they were more than that, too. They were prayers, offerings to the spirits of the wool and the water, requests for blessing on the work of their hands. Anya knew all the songs by heart, had learned them at her grandmother's knee, along with the techniques of the craft. As she sang, she felt connected not just to the work, but to all the generations of felt makers who had sung these same songs, worked this same magic. The wool beneath their hands was transforming. What had started as loose, fluffy fibers was becoming dense and strong. The felt was being born, emerging from the marriage of earth and water, fiber and force. Anya could feel it happening, could sense the moment when the wool crossed the threshold from potential to actuality. There, Vara said softly, her weathered hand resting on the felt. Do you feel it? The wool has become something new. Anya pressed her palm against the fabric they had created. It was still warm from the work, still damp from the water, but it was no longer wool. It was felt, strong and flexible, ready to serve its purpose. The transformation was complete. Around them, the other felt makers were at various stages of their own work. Some were just beginning, laying out fresh wool on their mats. Others were deep in the working phase, their hands moving in the ancient rhythms. Still others were finishing, examining their completed felt with the critical eye of the craftsperson. The sun was now fully up, warming the air and drying the morning mist. The felt-making camp had come fully to life, a community of creation where ancient skills were practiced with reverence and joy. Chapter 5. The Master's Touch. As the newly made felt dried slightly in the warming air, Vara began the finishing process. This was where her true mastery showed. where decades of experience guided her hands in perfecting the fabric they had created. She worked the felt further, stretching it gently here, compressing it there, evening out any thick or thin spots. Her touch was sure and light, like a musician tuning an instrument. Under her skilled hands, the felt became more than just functional fabric, became art. Each piece of felt has its own character, she explained to Anya, who watched every movement with eager attention. Our job is to discover that character and help it emerge. We do not impose our will upon the wool, but rather we listen to what it wants to become. Anya could see what her grandmother meant. The felt seemed to have a life of its own, responding to Vera's touch with subtle changes in texture and drape. Where she pressed, the fabric became denser. Where she stretched, it became more flexible. It was like watching a sculptor work marble, revealing the form that had always been hidden within. The finishing process required a different kind of skill than the initial felting. It needed sensitivity, intuition, an understanding of how the fabric would behave in use. Vara's hands moved with the wisdom of long experience, making tiny adjustments that would mean the difference between good felt and great felt. Your grandmother is touched by the spirits, said Dmitri, the old felt maker, pausing in his own work to watch Vara's technique. I have been making felt for 50 years, and still I learn from watching her hands. Vara smiled at the compliment, but continued her work without pause. She was in that place of deep concentration where the craftsperson becomes one with their craft, where conscious thought gives way to intuitive knowledge. Her hands seemed to move of their own accord, guided by something deeper than mere technique. As Anya watched, she tried to absorb not just the physical movements, but the spirit behind them. This was more than just a way of making fabric. It was a way of being in the world, of working in harmony with natural forces rather than trying to dominate them. Chapter 6. The colors of the steppe. With the first piece of felt complete, Vara began to teach Anya about color. Not all felt was left in its natural white or gray. The Scythians were master dyers as well as felt makers, able to create fabrics in every hue of the rainbow. Color comes from the earth itself, Vara said, leading Anya to a collection of clay pots filled with various substances. The red earth gives us our reds. The berries of the steppe give us purples and blues. The roots and bark of certain trees give us yellows and browns. Each pot contained a different dye material, some dried and ground to powder, others preserved in their own liquids. Anya recognized many of them: the madder root that gave a rich red, the walnuts that produced deep browns, the indigo traders brought from distant lands that created the most prized blue. But first, Vara said, the felt must be prepared to receive the color. Like a person who must open their heart to receive wisdom, the felt must be opened to receive the dye. The process involved treating the felt with various substances that would help it hold color evenly and permanently. Vara showed Anya how to prepare a mordant bath, using materials that would create a chemical bond between the dye and the wool fibers. They selected a piece of felt that had been made the day before, now fully dry and ready for dyeing. Vara had chosen a soft yellow for this piece, made from the flowers of a plant that grew wild on the steppes. The dye pot had been prepared hours earlier, the plant material steeped in hot water until it released its golden essence. Lowering the felt into the dye bath was a moment of transformation, as magical as the original felting process. The white fabric disappeared into the yellow liquid, and when it emerged, it would be forever changed. Anya watched with wonder as the color penetrated the felt, turning it from pale cream to rich gold. "Color is life," Vara said, stirring the dye pot gently. "It is the difference between existing and truly living. Our felt protects the body, but color feeds the soul." Chapter 7. The Patterns of Memory. As the golden felt soaked in its dye bath, Vara began to teach Anya about patterns. The Scythians did not simply make plain felt. They created intricate designs that told stories, preserved memories, and connected the present to the past. Some patterns were geometric, based on the natural forms found on the steppes, the spiral of a ram's horn, the radiating lines of the sun, the zigzag of lightning across the sky. Others were more complex, depicting animals, plants, and mythological creatures that held special meaning for the tribe. Each family has its own patterns, Vara explained, showing Anya a piece of felt decorated with intricate designs. These are passed down from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter. They are our history, written in wool and dye. The pattern on this particular piece told the story of a great hunt, with stylized horses and hunters arranged in a dynamic composition that seemed to move and flow across the fabric. Anya traced the lines with her finger, feeling the slight texture differences that had been created during the felting process. "How do you make the patterns?" she asked, studying the complex design. "There are many ways," Vara replied. "Sometimes we lay colored wool into the white wool before felting, so the pattern becomes part of the fabric itself. Sometimes we use resist materials that prevent the dye from penetrating certain areas. And sometimes we add the pattern after, using embroidery," or she showed Anya examples of each technique. The inlaid patterns had a soft, organic quality, where the colors blended subtly at their edges. The resist-dyed pieces had sharp, clean lines, where the pattern met the background. The embroidered felts added a third dimension, with raised designs that caught the light. Each method required different skills, different ways of thinking about design and execution. Anya realized that mastering felt making was not just about learning one technique. but about understanding an entire system of related crafts that worked together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Chapter 8. The Stories in Silk. As the day progressed and more felt emerged from the workshops, Vara began to tell Anya about the trade routes that connected their steppe homeland to distant lands. The Scythians were not isolated nomads. They were part of a vast network of trade and cultural exchange that stretched from the Black Sea to the borders of China. "Our felt travels far," Vara said, watching a caravan approach in the distance. "It goes to the cold mountains where fur traders need warm clothing. It goes to the southern cities where merchants prize its water-resistant qualities. And sometimes, very rarely, pieces of our finest work make their way to the palaces of kings." The approaching caravan was led by Bat-Bayar, a Scythian trader who specialized in luxury goods. His horses were laden with bundles wrapped in leather and felt, and Anya could see the glint of metal and the shimmer of silk among his wares. When Bat-Bayar reached the felt-making camp, he was greeted with the warm hospitality that the Scythians showed to all travelers. Food was shared, news was exchanged, and gradually the conversation turned to trade. From his packs, Bat-Bayar produced wonders that made Anya gasp with delight. There was silk from the distant east, so fine it seemed to capture light itself. There were metals worked into intricate jewelry, precious stones that sparkled like captured stars, and spices that filled the air with exotic fragrances. But what interested Vara most were the small samples of felt that Bat-Bayar had brought back from his travels. These were pieces made by other nomadic peoples, each with their own techniques and traditions. By studying these samples, the Scythian felt makers could learn new methods and improve their own craft. "Look at this," Vara said, examining a piece of felt that had been decorated with metal threads. "See how they have woven the metal directly into the wool before felting. It creates a fabric that is both beautiful and strong, perfect for a warrior's armor." Anya studied the sample with fascination. The metal threads formed a subtle pattern that only became visible when the light hit it at the right angle. It was a technique she had never seen before, and she could immediately imagine ways to adapt it for their own use. Chapter 9. The Evening Light as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The felt-making camp took on a golden glow. The work of the day was winding down, but there was still one more lesson for Vara to share with her granddaughter. They walked together to a quiet spot overlooking the steppes, where the grass waved in the evening breeze like a green sea. Here, away from the bustle of the camp, Vara began to speak of the deeper meanings of their craft. "Felt making is more than just a way to make cloth," she said, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "It is a meditation on transformation, on the way that many small things can become one great thing. Each fiber of wool is weak alone, but together they become strong enough to turn away the wind and rain. Anya listened quietly, understanding that this was the most important lesson of all. Her grandmother was not just teaching her to make felt, she was teaching her about life itself. We are like the wool fibers, Vara continued. Alone, we are vulnerable to the storms of life. But when we come together, when we support each other and work as one, we become something greater than ourselves. The felt is a reminder of this truth. The old woman reached into her robe and pulled out a small piece of felt, no bigger than her palm. It was exquisitely made, dyed a deep blue that seemed to hold the color of the evening sky. The pattern worked into it was simple but profound, a circle with radiating lines like the sun or a flower. This was made by my grandmother, Vara said, placing the small piece in Anya's hands and her grandmother before her. It has been passed down through 7 generations of felt makers, each adding their own touch, their own understanding. Anya held the ancient felt reverently, feeling the weight of history in her hands. The fabric was still strong despite its age, still beautiful despite the years. It spoke of continuity, of traditions that connected past and future through the present moment. One day, Vara said, you will pass this on to your own granddaughter, and you will tell her the stories, teach her the techniques, help her understand the deeper meanings. This is how wisdom survives, not in books or monuments, but in the skilled hands and open hearts of each generation. Chapter 10. The night's embrace as darkness settled over the steppes. The felt makers gathered around the central fire for the evening meal. The day's work was done, and now was the time for food, conversation, and the sharing of stories that kept their culture alive. Anya sat beside her grandmother, still holding the ancient piece of felt. Around them, the other felt makers displayed the day's work pieces of various sizes and colors, each one unique, each one carrying the mark of its maker's skill and vision. Old Dmitri had created a piece of remarkable fineness, so dense and smooth that water would roll off it like rain from a duck's back. Young Sasha had made her first successful large piece, a cloak-sized felt that would keep its wearer warm through the coldest winter. Mira had experimented with a new pattern, creating a design that seemed to dance in the firelight. But perhaps the most remarkable piece was one that several of the felt makers had worked on together, a large carpet-like felt that told the story of their people's migration across the steppes. The pattern was complex and beautiful, with horses and riders, mountains and rivers, all worked in subtle variations of color that created depth and movement. This will go to the winter camp, Vara explained to Anya. It will hang in the great tent where the elders gather, and when children ask about their history, the patterns will help tell the story. As the evening progressed, the felt makers began to share stories of their own. Each had tales to tell of particularly challenging pieces, of techniques learned from distant traders, of felt that had saved lives in fierce storms or bitter cold. Anya listened to it all, absorbing not just the technical knowledge, but the culture and traditions that surrounded it. She was beginning to understand that becoming a master felt maker meant more than just learning to work with wool and water. It meant becoming a keeper of memories, a guardian of ancient wisdom, a link in the unbroken chain that connected past to future. Chapter 11. The dream weavers. As the fire burned low and the stars emerged in the clear steppe sky, Vara began to tell Anya about the felt makers who worked not just with their hands, but with their dreams. "There are some among us," she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "who can felt while they sleep. They dream of patterns and colors, and when they wake, they find that their night visions have somehow found their way into the wool they work the next day." Anya had heard whispers of such things before, but always dismissed them as folklore. Now, hearing her grandmother speak of it with such seriousness, she wondered if there might be truth in the tales. "Your great-grandmother was one of these dream weavers," Vara continued. "She would lay out her wool before sleep, and in the morning the most beautiful patterns would appear, as if the spirits themselves had worked the felt during the night." The old woman gestured to the ancient piece of felt that Anya still held, that patterned the sun with its radiating rays came to her in a dream. She saw it as clearly as if it were painted on the inside of her eyelids, and when she woke, her hands knew exactly how to create it. Anya studied the pattern again, seeing it now with new eyes. There was something about the way the lines flowed, the way the colors blended, that did seem otherworldly, as if it had been created by more than human hands. "Can anyone become a dream weaver?" she asked. Vara smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps it requires great sensitivity, great openness to the spirits of the craft. Most importantly, it requires complete dedication to the felt-making path. The dreams come only to those who have given themselves wholly to the craft." As the night deepened and the felt makers began to seek their sleeping furs, Anya found herself thinking about her grandmother's words. She wondered what it would be like to feel so connected to the craft that it followed her even into sleep, to be so attuned to the spirits of wool and water that they would work through her dreams. That night, as she lay in her felt-lined sleeping roll under the vast canopy of stars, Anya dreamed of patterns and colors, of wool transforming under moonlight, of hands that worked with the wisdom of generations. And when she woke in the morning, she found her own hands tingling with an eagerness to work, as if they had been busy while she slept. Chapter 12. The Sacred Grove. The next morning brought an unexpected adventure. Vara announced that they would take a journey to gather special materials from the sacred grove, a place deep in the steppes where certain plants grew that were essential for the finest dye work. They rode out just after sunrise, their horses picking their way carefully through the tall grass. The sacred grove was a day's ride from the felt-making camp, and the journey would give Vara more time to share her knowledge with Anya. As they rode, Vara pointed out various plants along the way, explaining their uses in the dyeing process. There was the wild madder that gave such beautiful reds, the woad that could produce blues rivaling the finest indigo, and the various lichens that, when properly prepared, yielded purples fit for royalty. The old ones say that each plant has a spirit, Vara explained as they paused to water their horses at a small stream. To get the best color, we must approach them with respect, asking permission before we harvest, giving thanks for their gift. The sacred grove, when they finally reached it, was unlike anywhere Anya had ever been. Ancient trees formed a natural circle around a small clearing where rare plants grew in abundance. The air itself seemed different, here thicker, more alive, charged with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. This place has been sacred to our people for countless generations, Vara said, dismounting and approaching the grove on foot. It is said that the first felt makers received their knowledge here, in visions granted by the tree spirits. They entered the grove respectfully, Vara teaching Anya the proper prayers and offerings that must be made before any plants could be harvested. The rituals were ancient and precise, performed exactly as they had been for hundreds of years. In the center of the grove grew a tree unlike any other, its barks silver white, its leaves shimmering with an inner light. At its base grew flowers of an indescribable color, somewhere between blue and purple, shot through with threads of silver. These are the dream flowers, Vara whispered, kneeling beside them. They bloom only here, only for those who have been chosen. Their dye creates colors that seem to live and breathe, colors that change with the light and the mood of the one who wears them. Chapter 13. The Harvest of Colors, the harvest of the dream flowers, was conducted with the utmost ceremony. Vara showed Anya how to approach each flower individually, to ask its permission before cutting, to thank it for its sacrifice. Only certain flowers could be taken, those that seemed to glow with inner light, those that bent toward the harvester as if offering themselves willingly. As they worked, Vara continued her teaching. These flowers will give us dye for the most precious felt, the kind that is made for shamans and wise women, for pieces that will be used in the most sacred ceremonies. The color they yield is not just beautiful, it has power. Anya could feel that power as she worked, a tingling in her fingers as she carefully placed each flower in her gathering basket. The flowers seemed almost alive, pulsing with energy that made her feel more awake, more aware of the world around her. They spent the entire day in the sacred grove, harvesting not just the dream flowers, but many other plants as well. There were roots that would give yellows bright as sunlight, berries that yielded purples dark as midnight, and bark that could produce browns rich as fertile earth. But it was not just the physical harvest that mattered. As they worked, Vara shared stories and wisdom that could only be transmitted in this sacred place. She spoke of the relationship between color and emotion, of how different hues could affect the wearer's state of mind, of the responsibility that came with creating such powerful materials. A felt maker who works with the sacred dyes becomes something more than a craftsperson, Vara explained as they prepared to leave the grove. She becomes a healer, a guardian of the spirit as well as the body. The colors we create can bring peace to the troubled, strength to the weak, hope to the despairing. As the sun began to set, they made their final offerings to the grove spirits and prepared for the journey home. Their baskets were full of precious materials, but more importantly, Anya felt full of new understanding about the deeper purposes of her craft. Chapter 14: The Night Journey. The ride back to camp under the star-filled sky was a time of quiet reflection. The horses moved steadily through the darkness, their hooves whispers soft on the grass, while grandmother and granddaughter rode in comfortable silence, each lost in her own thoughts. Anya found herself thinking about all she had learned, not just during this day, but over the past months of intensive training. The techniques, the stories, the spiritual dimensions of felt making it all seemed to be coming together into a coherent whole, a complete way of understanding her place in the world. "Grandmother," she said finally, her voice soft in the night air, "how do you know when you have truly mastered the craft?" Vara was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Mastery is not a destination, child, but a journey. Each piece of felt teaches us something new. Each day brings new challenges and new discoveries. The master is not the one who knows everything, but the one who remains always open to learning." They rode on through the night, the sound of their horses' hooves creating a gentle rhythm that seemed to match the beating of Anya's heart. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had guided felt makers across these steppes for countless generations. As they crested a low hill, they could see the warm glow of the campfires in the distance. Home was near, and with it, the opportunity to put the day's lessons into practice. Anya felt a deep sense of anticipation, eager to begin working with the sacred materials they had gathered. "Tomorrow," Vara said, as if reading her thoughts, "we will begin to prepare the dream flower dye. It is a process that takes many days, and each step must be performed with the utmost care. Are you ready for such a challenge?" Anya nodded, though her grandmother could not see the gesture in the darkness. "I am ready," she said, and she felt the truth of those words in her bones. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with the knowledge and wisdom she had gained, and with the strength that came from being part of an ancient tradition. Chapter 15. The Sacred Preparation. The preparation of the dream flower dye was unlike any process Anya had witnessed before. It began before dawn, with prayers and purification rituals that cleansed both the workspace and the workers. Vara insisted that they fast until the work was complete, taking only water blessed by the wise women of the tribe. The flowers themselves had to be prepared with special care. Each one was examined individually, its petals separated and sorted according to their color and luminosity. The stems and leaves were set aside for other purposes. Nothing could be wasted when dealing with such precious materials. The spirits of the flowers must be awakened gradually, Vara explained, as they worked in the pre-dawn darkness, using only the light of a single oil lamp. Too much light, too much heat, too much haste, and their power will be lost forever. The first step was to create a solution of pure water infused with silver knot, the metal itself, but water that had been blessed by being poured over sacred silver objects. This water would draw out the essential colors of the flowers while preserving their spiritual properties. As the sun rose, they began the slow process of extracting the dye. The flowers were placed in special clay vessels that had been blessed by the shamans, covered with the silver water, and left to steep in a place where they would receive the first rays of the morning sun, but be protected from its full intensity. Throughout the day, they tended the steeping flowers like a mother tending a sick child. The temperature had to be maintained within precise limits. The vessels turned at regular intervals to ensure even extraction. The prayers repeated at the proper times to maintain the spiritual connection. Anya found the work both challenging and deeply satisfying. It required all of her attention, all of her skill, leaving no room for distraction or doubt. She began to understand why her grandmother had described it as a form of meditation. The intense focus required seemed to open doorways in her mind that she had never known existed. Chapter 16. The Color of Dreams. By the third day, the dream flower dye was ready. When Vara lifted the cloth covering the vessel, the liquid beneath seemed to glow with its own inner light. The color was indescribably shifted and changed as they watched, now blue, now purple, now silver, as if it contained all colors and none. Now comes the true test, Vara said, her voice hushed with reverence. We must prepare felt worthy of such dye. Not just any felt will do it, must be perfect in every way, a canvas suitable for such sacred color. They selected wool that had been specially prepared, fibers that were not just clean, but had been blessed and purified according to ancient rituals. The felting process itself was conducted with the same ceremonial precision as the dye preparation, every step performed with prayer and intention. As they worked the wool, Anya felt something different happening. The fibers seemed more responsive than usual, more eager to bind together. It was as if the spiritual preparation had awakened not just the dye, but the wool itself, making it more receptive to transformation. The felting took longer than usual, not because they worked slowly, but because they paused frequently for prayer and reflection. Each stage of the process was treated as a sacred act, a communion with the spirits of the materials they worked with. When the felt was complete, it was more beautiful than anything Anya had ever seen. Even before dying, it seemed to glow with an inner light, its surface so smooth and even that it looked like polished silk. It was clearly destined for something special. This felt will become a shaman's cloak, Vara announced. The pattern we create with the dream flower dye will tell.